You're listening to episode 74, Giving a Voice to the Innocent with Jamie Sivrais. Welcome to the Grass Gets Greener podcast, the show for survivors by survivors. I'm your host, Melissa Wilson, a bullying survivor and anti-bullying advocate. And each week you'll hear from a survivor who has overcome a traumatic experience to go on to not only survive, but thrive, so that you can too, starting now. Hey there, welcome, and thank you so much for joining me for this week's episode. And we're going to be joined by Jamie Sivrais of A Voice for the Innocent. But before we get into that, for those of you who are interested, I just want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by audible.com. Audible is the premier provider of digital audiobooks. I signed up with them to get you a free audiobook download along with a 30-day free trial. They have over 180,000 titles, including some that have been mentioned on this show in the past, that you can choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or whatever you use as an MP3 player. So if this is something that interests you and you want to check it out, all you have to do is go to thegrassgetsgreener.com/audible, and you can go ahead and get your free audio download along with that 30-day free trial. So as I said, today's episode is going to be with Jamie Sivrais, who is a sexual abuse survivor and the founder of the nonprofit A Voice for the Innocent, which is a great organization for those affected by sexual violence. I do want to be sure to issue a trigger warning for this episode, especially for those of you who are survivors of sexual abuse. What Jamie talks about with his experience could definitely be triggering for you. But Jamie's going to talk to us about how he grew up an only child and only had his mom around. But then he eventually got into contact with his dad when he was about 10 years old and developed a relationship with him and found out that he had some siblings, and things were really good. You know, he was happy to have a kind of a family. But then, of course, things ended up being too good to be true, and he's going to tell us about what happened there. And one of the things he's going to touch upon is how and why he was conflicted at the time about what was happening to him, and when it became clear to him that it was wrong and that it had to stop. But of course, he thought that he would get into trouble if he told someone about what was happening. And interestingly, he knew about sexual abuse, he was educated about that, but he didn't realize that that's what was happening to him until it was pointed out to him. And then he's going to share what he went through when his abuser ended up getting reported to the police, and why Jamie asked the judge to not put him in jail. And we'll talk about how he was affected by all of this. And then we'll get into why Jamie decided to create A Voice for the Innocent and the great mission that he's on with that organization. So those are some of the things that we're going to get into in this episode. But before we do that, I just wanted to give you a quick heads up that sometime later this week, for those of you who are listening to this when it's gone live, I'm going to be releasing a special bonus recording here on the podcast feed, where I want to let you know about something that I've been setting up for the podcast that I would love to have you check out. So it's going to be just a quick bonus recording, about 10 minutes. So be on the lookout for that, and yeah, I would just love to have you check that out. And I'm just going to leave it at that for now. And so without further ado, we'll go ahead and get into this one, and I will bring Jamie on. Jamie, welcome to the podcast, and thank you for joining me here to share your story with us.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So you and I got connected through past guest Becky Perkins, but you also know another past guest, Mike Pistorino.
Yes.
Yeah. Both of them through your organization, I believe, right?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, A Voice for the Innocent. And I just want to say that I admire the work you're doing through your organization, where you've created a platform for survivors of sexual abuse and rape to share their stories anonymously so that they feel like they have a voice.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you. It's a lot of work to grow an organization, but it is definitely rewarding.
Yeah, I bet. And of course, I'm happy to have you tell us more about that a little later on.
Sure.
But what I like to do here is start with your story of what you've been through and how you've been able to get to where you are today. How does that sound to you?
That works for me.
Yeah, so great. If you want to, just kind of give us a summary of the abuse and the trauma that you went through growing up, or whatever you'd like us to know about it, and then we can go from there.
Sure, I can do that. So I was raised as an only child by my single mother. Had very little contact with my dad in my early life. They were never married, and it was all very small things that we would kind of connect with, and we would go visit him at his work. He worked at like an Arby's, so we would go visit him at the restaurant or whatever, but it was never anything substantial. And then at some point in my early life, we just kind of lost touch. And, um, so several years passed. And I always asked, how come I don't have a dad, or where's my dad? And my mom always just kind of responded, your dad loves you very much. He just doesn't know how to be a dad right now. And so I kind of took that as, that was a fine answer for me. And I moved on. And then one day, I guess I was around 10, maybe around 10. My grandma ran into my dad at like a department store. And he said, like, I've been really trying to get a hold of them, but we had both of us had moved, and it was, before the times of Facebook, obviously, where you can just look someone up.
Right.
So we had lost touch, and he asked my grandma, can you pass on my number? And so my mom ended up calling him and kind of reconnecting, and found out that I was going to be having a baby sister with he and his wife, my stepmom. And I was thrilled to hear that he was interested, and I was in a relationship with me, and I was thrilled to hear that I had a sibling, because that was the other thing too, is where's my dad and how come I don't have any siblings? All my friends have siblings, And
Yeah.
and so I was so excited that I was going to get to see my dad again, and that I was going to have a sibling. And so we met. It was a bowling alley. We went to a bowl. He was a big bowler, so we went and bowled and had fun. And the next time we met, my stepmom was like 8.5 months pregnant at that time. So next time we met, I got to meet my little sister and all this, and we kind of started doing I'm going to go over to his house, once a month for a Saturday night, and then that turned slowly into one weekend a month, which turned slowly into the every other weekend that so many children are used to with parents. And so we did a lot of really fun things. Like, I was a Boy Scout, so he would help me build the boat for the boat regatta, or the little rocket that you have for the Pinewood Derbies, all these kind of stuff. And we would go fishing, and we'd go camping, and like all these kind of traditional picturesque father-son things. And then,
so you were having a good
oh
time.
yeah. It was great. It was everything I wanted. I had a dad, I had a sibling, and it was, actually, and a year later, my little brother was born. So it was like, this whole family, 2 Christmases, you know what I mean? Like all that kind of stuff, 2 birthdays. And he, at one point, took on a job delivering our local newspaper. And it was 7 nights a week. It was a very thankless job. He didn't get paid very much, but it was enough that it was worth it. And so he, you never have a day off. People want their papers, especially back then. So he would get up, between 1 and 2 in the morning, sometimes midnight, like on Saturday nights when the Sunday papers were so big, and he'd go and stuff the papers. Like, they come in different stacks. The papers have to be assembled and then all stuffed into the bags. And And I would go with him to do that, and then we'd go out and deliver the papers, and throw the papers up to the porches or whatever. And I mean, it was really fun. I mean, you're out. I was 11, 12 years old, out in the middle of the night, like when I'm not typically awake, and it was just me and my dad, and we would listen to like 90s country music, which I still have a strong connection to, not country music as a whole, but that particular decade. I love a lot of the music from there. And, he'd stop at a BP and get himself a coffee and me a French vanilla cappuccino. I mean, there was this ritual, like we would go and stuff the papers, then we'd stop at BP, then we'd deliver, and then we'd go home and we'd go to sleep. And this was every night that I was there, every weekend night. And I loved that too. Going and delivering these papers.
Mm-hmm.
And then, after several months of doing that, it kind of turned into, there was a bit more of another tradition added onto that, where every time we'd go home, it'd be 5, 6 in the morning, everyone's asleep, and he started showing me pornography. So
Mm-hmm.
this ritual kind of took this like sinister turn, and then after that, it would be, having me masturbate, and then him masturbating me. And this went on. I mean, every time we'd go out, or every time I knew that the house was going to be empty, this is what would be happening.
Mm-hmm.
And
did it seem strange to you or inappropriate at that time? Or
it did seem inappropriate. See, that's kind of a weird aspect, I think, as I was a prepubescent kid getting ready to go into puberty. I was definitely curious about sex and about that's a very important time for a kid that age. And but there was still definitely a feeling of like, this is wrong, but if I tell, I'll be in trouble, because my mom wouldn't want me watching these movies. And the other end of that I think is so interesting is, I was very educated about sex through my mom would have talks with me, and she also got me books and would let me, like, appropriate educational books, and would let me read those on my own, and then be extremely open to questions if I had them. Sometimes she'd follow up, sometimes she wouldn't. She didn't make it uncomfortable to talk about, but she was always available and made me know what things were, and what was going on and all that. So I was very educated about sex at a young age, and about sexual abuse. And I knew what rape was. I knew what sexual harassment was. I knew what all these things were. But I couldn't see it in my own situation.
Hmm.
I never,
But because it was your dad?
I think that's a part of it.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a part of it too about, I mean, I think one of the hardest things for sexual abuse survivors is, sex is meant to feel good, so there's that, almost that duality for abuse survivors sometimes, at least in my case, but I know other people have told me as well, where like, physically, it can be something you enjoy while it's creating mental turmoil.
Mm-hmm.
um
Mm-hmm.
like, that's not the way I was meant to be introduced to sex, by any means. So it's this weird kind of, on one hand, it was really, I mean, not now as an adult, but I remember going through it, and on one hand, it was almost exciting. I know that's a really odd word, but that's, looking back, that's not how I look at it. But in that time, it didn't feel like I was being hurt. I didn't think about lasting effects. I was 12. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And it went on for so long that it almost became just, that's just what happened. And um, it wasn't something I gave too much thought about anyway, until the time when he did perform oral sex on me. That happened one time, and that was, for me, kind of the last straw. That, like, it almost took it too far, and then I kind of realized, like, gosh, this has been happening for 2 years now, 3 years. Like, it kind of took me to a different um level, I think, where I realized, like, I don't like this at all. I don't like any part of this.
Yeah, and you hadn't told anyone about it up until this point, right?
No, and I think, I don't recall this, but I've been friends with my best friend since I was 5 years old, and I've talked to him as an adult, and he says that I mentioned something to him before everything, before I did end up telling for good, but I don't remember ever telling him that. He remembers exactly where we were. But if I was 12, he was 13, and didn't necessarily know what to do. What 13-year-old is, like is trained to make those kinds of decisions. That's very difficult.
Right.
So
Right. But it's interesting there. You bring up this point of how it becomes difficult to talk about it and to tell someone about it because you're like, you were afraid of getting in trouble.
yeah, I thought if I told my mom, she wouldn't let me go back over there because I was watching adult movies. I never thought about. I thought I would get in trouble. I never thought about whether he'd get in trouble. That wasn't ever on my mind. I thought it was me that would get in trouble. And I just so I didn't tell anybody. And I think there was also a thing about you know, growing up with my mom, kids learn certain boundaries and kids learn how to kind of push back against rules. And if my mom told me it was time to get off Nintendo or whatever, I could beg her for 5 more minutes, or um I could even talk back a little bit if she wanted me to come in and I didn't feel like it. That those kind of give and take boundaries are established between parents, but I never had that with my dad because it was always kind of a new relationship. Even though I was going over there, I wasn't living with him, So his house was never home. I was always a guest there. At least kind of felt like it. I wasn't in their normal weekly rituals or this or that. So if I wanted to go play Nintendo at Dad's house, if I asked him and he said no, that's just it. It wasn't because he wasn't physically abusive and that he wasn't hitting people or anything like that. It wasn't for fear of punishment that I wouldn't push back. I just didn't have that comfort level. So I think even if I had been uncomfortable with the things that had been happening, I would have had no idea how to say no in that relationship.
Yeah. But then you did end up telling your mom right after that last incident with him, right?
Yeah. So we had actually moved out of the city where we all lived. And I was finishing up my school year there. So we lived out of the district, and my mom was working, and I walked home with my best friend, the one who said I told him long before. And I walked home with him, and we had lived next door to him for years and years. So like our parents were best friends and this and that. So he and I walked home, and my mom had said, go home with him and go ahead and call your dad and make arrangements to go over there this weekend. And so I did that. I went home with him at least, but I kind of told him what had been going on, and I finally opened up, I guess, for the first time that I remember, and I said, "Hey, this has been happening at my dad's. I can't go back there, and my mom wants me to call him and set up a time for him to come pick me up or for her to drop me off. Like, don't let me use the phone when I get to your house." And he said, "Okay," and I didn't try, and he wouldn't have let me anyway. And because I knew that my mom would be coming to pick me up there several hours later and saying, "Am I dropping you off? Is he coming to get you? What's the plan?" so to speak. And she got there and she said, "Did you call your dad?" And I said, "No, I'll tell you why in the car." And she said, "Okay." And then we went to the car and I told her what had been happening. And I said, I don't want to go back over there anymore because he's been, making me watch porn and making me masturbate with him. And I don't even remember exactly what I said at the beginning, but then her response was, "You mean he's been sexually abusing you?" And that's when it all clicked. That's when all that education kind of clicked in my head. Like, oh, yeah, I guess that is what's been happening. I guess your own parent can do that to you. So
How did that make you feel when you had that realization?
um
Do you remember?
I don't know that I necessarily even realized that clicked in that moment. I was so I mean, I'd had such a stressful afternoon knowing that I was going to have to tell my mom that, not knowing what to expect. I mean, my mom was always so supportive of me and everything. My mom's an ideal parent. So I wasn't necessarily scared anymore. I just didn't want to have that conversation. And so when I did, and she responded with support to me, it was just such a relief that I don't necessarily, it wasn't until later that I looked back and was like, I didn't realize it was sexual abuse till right then,
Mm-hmm. Well, that's great that she was supportive, and I mean, it definitely seems like that's how she has been for you
Yes.
all these years.
Yeah.
So that's great that you've had that, because if she had been unsupportive, then I'm sure that would have only made matters so much worse.
Gosh, I hear those stories all the time of a parent that didn't believe or
Yeah.
whatever. And yeah, it would have made it worse for sure.
Yeah. So what happened after that?
We cried a little bit in the car, and we drove home. And she called my dad and said, or I remember verbatim, she said, my son will not be coming to your house anymore because you've been choosing to have sex with him. And you have 24 hours to decide whether or not you tell your wife or whether I tell her. And then you have 24 hours, that same 24 hours, to decide whether you tell the police or whether I tell the police. And I mean, like, my mom is 4'10", and at one point she was about as round as she was tall. She almost made a complete circle, and jolly. And like the first thing people associate with my mom is Christmas, and like just the Christmas season. She's that way year round. She's just happy and loving and everything. And she turned, she was not that person when she called him on the phone. She turned vicious, and to a point that I've never. She turned into to Mama Bear. You know what I mean?
Sure. I mean, someone was hurting her son. I mean, it doesn't matter if it's your father or some stranger. It's, I'm sure that made her very angry.
Yeah. So from there, he decided that he would tell both. I don't know. He wanted to talk to me that day, and she said only if he wants, if only if he lets you, or. And so I said that was okay, and she stayed on the phone, and I remember him saying, like, I'm sorry, and, if you had just said no, and she instantly stopped him and said, like, no, you don't put this on him.
Right.
He's 13. Like, you're the adult. You say no. You know what I mean? Like, and wouldn't even let him finish kind of even putting that blame on me a little bit. And so, I mean, from there, it was kind of a whirlwind. Of police interviews and getting into counseling, and because of course when she went to the police had to make sure I was in counseling, or oh no, I'm sorry, she went to counseling first, and counseling said, we're gonna have to make sure the police know, and so that's where we ended up going. And so maybe he wasn't the one that told the police, but she said, okay, we'll tell the police. He did end up telling his wife though. And I remember, it was so much. It was counseling and police interviews and discussions and having to go into and testify. I think, they talk about it in the movies all the time, but I think there was even a doll. You know what I mean? I don't remember a ton about that. What I remember next though was when it came to the sentencing. And it was the summer after that year ended. And I remember she had always given me the option of, like, if I had the option of whether or not we were going to, whether or not I was like, I had to go to some different police interviews and things like that. But if me going was optional, she would give me the option. She wouldn't persuade me in any way. So I had told her that I didn't want to go to the sentencing. And then I guess I woke up the morning of the sentencing and said I did want to go. So she canceled all her plans and took me down, and I got in front of the judge. At this time, my stepmom was about 8.5 months pregnant with my third sibling. So,
oh wow.
And she only, she was working I think just a part-time job at that point, and he was kind of making the money. And so I just asked the judge to not put him in jail because look at my stepmom, she's very pregnant, and the judge honored that, and then looked at my dad and said, I'm going to listen to what that little boy says, and he just saved you from going to jail, but if it wouldn't make me go to jail, I'd walk off this walk off this bench and punch you in the mouth, And I distinctly remember this old man judge saying that, and so what my mom did for me though, and aside from all that, is she then somehow rallied all the male figures in her life and brought them around me, and not just the males, but primarily the males, and made sure I had positive role models, and made sure that I knew that it was not that nothing was my fault and that I hadn't done anything wrong. And she made sure that other family members told me the same thing, and that made sure that I knew that they still all loved me. And um, she really just almost to the point where I was becoming a teenager, and I was like, all right, mom, I get it. You love me. I didn't do anything wrong, like almost to an annoying level. But
Well, that's a good thing, though.
it certainly is, But I never once went a day where I didn't think I had at least my mom in my corner. And most days it was a million other people that she got there too, So,
Now, going through, all the court proceedings and having to go to counseling and everything, that must have been very stressful in and of itself on you.
I imagine so. Like I said, I don't remember a ton about that time.
Okay.
I don't know if that means that it was stressful, so I blocked it out, or it could have meant that it was, insignificant, so I didn't hold on to those memories. But I know that I do remember one particular police interview where it's the only one that I really remember, and it's where I found out that my dad had an affair on my stepmom, and I found out that I had another sibling. And I didn't even know brother or sister. I just knew I had another sibling out there. And the mother was someone that he had used to work with. That's all I knew for years and years. That's all I knew. So I do remember that conversation, and I think maybe because it was kind of a significant thing. But for me, I think I don't remember a lot because I was just telling the same thing over and over again, and maybe it was stressful. I just don't. I think I'm thankful that I don't remember a lot of that.
Yeah. How long did that go on for before, the sentencing had happened, and or when the sentencing was going to happen?
The whole thing couldn't have lasted more than a couple months. I remember.
Okay, that's pretty quick.
It was quick. I think he didn't try to fight it, and he admitted everything both to my mom and to the law enforcement. So he pled guilty.
Did he get punished in any way?
He was on probation for a very long time. He got a lot of community service, and he still has to register as a sex offender. So he did. I mean, and he was ordered court-ordered counseling and everything. But I remember when I told my friend, the day that I told my mom, we walked home from school, and we wouldn't have walked home if it was, bad weather, super cold or icy or anything. And so it must have been a relatively nice day. And I know that by the start of the next school year, court was finished and all that was done and kind of behind me. So, it couldn't have taken more than, April to August or something like that.
And then have you talked to your father since then, or?
So I think, at this point, my story kind of becomes a bit not like others, because, and I don't know why I did this, but I got very involved in the music scene in high school, and years had passed at this time, a couple years, and I had written a couple letters that had gone back and forth between that were like, our counselors would fax to each other basically. They had to go through the counselors. There was no direct contact, obviously. And I'd had contact with my stepmom and mom, still stay good friends. And at that time, my stepmom chose to stay with him, but she still made sure I got to see my siblings and brought them around, and we'd go do lunch and things like that. And I mean, I have to give her so much credit for that, because she owed me nothing, and she still made sure that they were part of my life. She's a good woman. But I got involved in the music scene, and I would one night I was driving by then, and we got done with a show, some punk rock show at some teen center or something like that. And it was late, and I was staying the night at my friend's house, and he didn't have any kind of curfew or anything. So it was like midnight, 1 o'clock, and I decided to go visit my dad at the paper route place, where he stuffed the papers. I don't know why I did that, you know. I think I spent a lot of time in high school pretending or not realizing that I wasn't necessarily affected by all that, or
Hmm.
maybe just not realizing the dangerous habits that might have formed or the unhealthy relationships that I would have because of, you know, different mentalities I think the abuse caused. I just wasn't at that point yet. I thought like, okay, that's all done. And look at me, I'm still doing okay. So I went to visit him, and that was kind of odd. Looking back, that's a really uncomfortable decision I made. I think I wanted a dad figure, and I didn't understand anything about whatever, mental illness or whatever must have caused him to do this, or whatever. Um,
Hmm.
I just kind of thought like, okay, we won't do that again. We can still have a normal relationship. Um,
So that's what you
I,
were
I
hoping
think I
for.
wanted that, yeah, and so
Mm.
and I actually fought for that for years in a way. I went and visited him there. I remember he came. I was very involved in like I said, in the band scene here, and then also in high school, I was involved in a lot of plays and drama and stuff. And I remember my senior year, my stepmom came out and saw me in a play, and then really liked the performance I did, and said he had to come back and see. So he did. She brought him back the next night. Um, I don't remember talking to him that night, but I know he was there, and then I know he came to my high school graduation as well, and I remember him being there. So after I graduated high school, um, I would, try to see him or talk to him here and there. What I learned then is that he and I had, aside from this obvious, tense past, we had very little in common. I mean, he still was listening to country music, and I was into the punk rock and hardcore scene. We didn't see eye to eye there. We didn't see eye to eye politically. He loved sports, and I didn't care about sports at that time. I cared about music and shows and movies and comic books, and we just had so little in common. Now, the one thing we had in common was he's a very good mechanic, and I wanted to be. I wanted to learn more about cars, and believe it or not a lot of money comes from playing in punk rock bands. So I never had a good car by any means. So I always needed work on my cars, and I always kind of looked at that as like, oh, I could go get it fixed, or I could fix this with my dad. Um, and he eventually got frustrated. He thought I only called him to get my car fixed. And we really never had any kind of discussion about anything that had happened. And but there was some semblance of a relationship, as odd as that might sound. And I'd go visit him. And one night, me, him, and my stepmom, after I was 21, went out and had a couple beers. And it was interesting.
Yeah. Do you think that he wanted to have a relationship with you?
I think he wouldn't have had any issue having. You know what? I'll actually go on a limb and say yes, ideally. I don't think he wants to face a lot of uncomfortable truths that now I am mature enough to, I think, demand to be faced if we're going to have a relationship. Which,
Hmm.
I mean, in my mind, is out of the question now, and I'm okay saying that. Um,
Hmm.
the hard part of that is I love my siblings so much, and they all know. Actually, my youngest sibling is still in high school, and I always made myself a promise that I wouldn't tell them until they were out of high school. But they had to move at one point because zoning laws were changed where they lived, and then he lived too close to a school, so they had to move. Um, so they knew a little bit, of what happened. But I think the way it all kind of ended is he started. My mom, my mom at one point, she had a really really unhealthy physically decade. She came down with breast cancer, and then that caused lots of complications in the surgeries she had after it, and she survived it, but it was almost like a domino effect for all these literally a decade's worth of different medical illnesses, and she's still doing as great as she can. But it seems like even, I mean, we're just now coming out of that really long, hard period. And so my mom was battling cancer, and I was playing in bands, and it was really convenient for both of us that I still live at home. I got to go and play out when I wanted to, and I got to go travel a little bit when I wanted to, but also my mom had help around the house when she needed. And
Mm-hmm.
he started getting um, a little bit preachy about the fact that I was in my 20s and still living at home, not really looking at any part of the situation about, oh, she has cancer. I mean, he just pretty much said, like, I don't know why you're not living on your own yet. I don't know why you don't have a better job yet. You're doing all this music stuff and you need to find something else. And part of me was just kind of like, where you been this whole time? And now you want to come and tell me how to live now that I'm entering adulthood. Like, that's not going to fly for very long.
Right.
Uh,
And as if he has any
for
right to
sure.
judge to
Yeah.
judge you.
And I think he was trying to, I mean, I have a stepson now, and so I'll find myself in the middle of these spiels, um, like father son spiels almost. But I think he was trying to do something like that, but it was at that point too little, too late. My stepson's 12. I've known him since he was 6, and I'm going to be here until he's an adult in his life. So maybe when he is an adult, those spiels that I might make can mean something. His didn't mean anything. You weren't around when I was making any of these decisions. He didn't help me get into college. Never helped me pay for college when I went for a year and a half. Didn't help me do any of that kind of stuff. And then wanted to criticize the choices I did make.
Right.
And really, like, the worst I was doing was playing in a band. I was never a heavy drinker. I was never a drug user. It wasn't as if I was waking up in jail. I was doing, and I was working jobs too. It wasn't even as if I was just not paying my own way. He just, I don't think, liked the way it looked.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember one night kind of sitting down, and I was frustrated, and I wrote him this really long email, and it kind of said, like, here's what I'm going to need. If this is going to continue, here's what I need. I need you to know that I never called you just to fix my car. One, I need you to know that at this point, my siblings were not yet 18. None of them were. So I said, I need you to know that I'm going to tell all of my siblings when they turn 18 why I stopped coming around. And there's not really much room for your opinion on that. That's something I need to do for me. And then I said, and I need to know anything about this other sibling I have that I know nothing about. And I need to know who their mom is. I need to know, is this someone I can potentially reach out to? Like, how's this? I want this information. I'm an adult, and I think I should be able to know.
Mm-hmm.
It was just kind of this. I don't necessarily think it was super aggressive, but it was definitely a little assertive about, like, this is what I'm going to need. And I got an email back the following day, or that night or something, and it said, I just wanted you to know I got your email, and I had a long response written out, and my computer crashed, and I have to go to bed, but I didn't want you to think I'd forgotten. The next contact I had from him was about a year and a half later,
Oh wow.
when he tried to add me on Facebook. And I just said, like, no, and at that point I think I'd had some anger issues that kind of surfaced as an adult. And at this point, I'm not scared to tell people what I think of them. And I usually extend a whole lot of grace, but I felt like at that point I had extended him enough grace. So I was not short with words when I told him what I thought about him. And he just responded and said, okay, I get it. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and that was that. And I have talked to my siblings since then, primarily my brother. My sister doesn't. My sister knows and is supportive. I wish we were able to have a closer relationship because I love my siblings very much, and they're funny and amazing people. But the reason you asked earlier if I thought that he wanted to have a relationship, and I think the answer is yes. Like, I think underneath everything, the answer is yes. because one night I went out to just have a couple beers with my brother, and really we had a lot of hard talks that night. And I think he said like that as he was leaving, he said like, "Oh, I'm going to." He told our dad like, "I'm going to meet Jamie," or if he said he was talking to me or something. And my dad would always make these little comments about like, that must be nice. He won't even talk to me, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost as and he's welcome to blame me. I'm not worried about that, but it's almost as if he puts why our relationship wouldn't work on me. I don't even know what like I don't know. I've never cared enough to ask his point of view, I think, on that, because I've got my own healing to do and my own life to live, and I think I've moved on quite a bit from that. I don't wish any harm on my dad. I mean, that's the father of my siblings who I love so much, and they've all said they didn't share any of the experiences that I did. He didn't hurt them in any way. So actually, my brother said the only thing I know him as is a great dad. They've never diminished my experiences, but I know they don't share those experiences. And who am I to take that away from them? Um, if someone came and said something terrible about my mom, or if if it was even true that my mom had done something terrible to somebody, I mean, I'd hate to be in that situation. I'd hate to be forced to reevaluate how I thought about her, and if they think about him in any, like, even just a fraction of as highly as I think of my mom, I don't want to put that on them. I would never make them say like me or him. You know what I mean? That's not healthy for anyone. That's not what I want to do.
Yeah, that makes it tricky, I guess,
Yeah.
when you have, one experience with him and it's not a good one, and then other people, your siblings, have a completely different experience.
Yeah.
Where he's been like, a good father to them and hasn't hurt them. That makes it really tricky.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think you mentioned you've had like some anger issues as a result of all of this.
Yeah, I think that's probably something I still work on to an extent. Definitely have dealt with anger. I've never been a violent person, but uh, sometimes just feeling angry to the point that it feels like it's going to boil out the top of my head sometimes. So it's not. I've never been violent, but I definitely would say that I have a sharp tongue sometimes, and have definitely had a history of saying things I didn't mean to people, and having to then go back and say I'm sorry, and I definitely have seen improvement in my life. I think that I think I had a lot of things to be angry about at one point in my life, and I have less now. Or even if I don't have less, I think maybe I have a better outlook. I mean, people grow and they become more mature, and I think that's the road I'm at least headed on. I definitely still get angry sometimes, but I think I know now. I've learned how to not lash out, or not ways to calm myself down or this or that, But definitely for a while I was probably just walking around with a cloud over my head,
Does playing music help with that?
It does.
Is that kind of is that part of maybe why you're in a band, or?
Well, actually, I'm not in a band anymore.
Okay.
I would have. I love music still. I think the main reason I'm not in a band is I'm kind of an all or nothing kind of person. And so if I'm in a band, I want to be giving it my all, and I've already given my all to other to other areas of my life. I still write music at home. I still sometimes get together and my friend and I will write a song or something like that. So I'm not actively playing. Plus, I got married and I've got a stepson, and that's just not a terribly realistic life for me anymore. Do still love playing it though at home, and I think that for a long time I would have told you that music is the number one release for me. And I don't think I would say that anymore. I think now I would say that helping others is the thing that helps me the most.
That's great. And I just wanted to ask you, one more question about like things that you had been through. Do you feel like having grown up without a dad, was it like for 10 years until you guys had started having a relationship?
Yeah, around 10 years.
Yeah. Do you feel like that in and of itself, even though, your relationship with your dad didn't turn out to be what you had hoped it would be, do you think that in and of itself, those 10 years of not having a dad around, impacted you later on in life?
I think it's possible. I've never really thought about it that way. You know, I probably, to an extent, I think what it probably did more than anything, though, is I had, so you ever go see a movie you're really, really excited to see, and then it's the worst movie you've ever seen, and
Yeah.
you walk out of the theater feeling really like, well, that was worthless. It's that times a million, I think maybe.
Mm.
I was so all my friends had their dads in the picture, and I didn't recognize them as potentially alcoholic or potentially abusive at that point, because I did have friends that had abusive fathers, but um, I just saw a family, and I think for so long I wanted that, and then I had that. I got it, and I was excited, and then it turned out to be so bad that um, I think that 10 years where he wasn't around maybe made my hopes higher. That things would be different. I don't know, maybe. And maybe there was
Mm.
just like that, but I was also, my mom had me in Boy Scouts, which had a lot of really positive male role models. Some of them I still talk to today. Um, but
Yeah, so she was very supportive, and you had a lot of um, just support in your life in general, it sounds like.
yes,
So maybe that kind of made up for it.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. What do you think has been maybe the biggest contributor to you being where you're at today?
Um, probably. I mean, has to be the way my mom reacted and the support she gave me. Um, we with the organization I run now, I mean, we talk so much about how the first response is so important, and it's setting the framework for how people will tell their stories later. And if you neglect their story, or if you don't believe them, they're going to be hesitant to tell it again or to try again, to make themselves that vulnerable again. So if she had responded in any kind of negative way, if she hadn't responded, I think exactly like she did, I wouldn't have been so comfortable telling my story. It's because I was. I never shied away from saying I was sexually abused by my dad. I never did. Like, as early as I can remember, there was never a time where I was like, ugh, I shouldn't say that. I didn't go around advertising it, but I had no problem, saying that to someone I would be in a conversation with or something if it came up. Um,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, so let's talk a bit now about your organization
mhm.
and how that has come to be, and what your mission is with it and everything.
Sure.
Tell us about it.
So, like I said, just the way my mom responded allowed me to tell my story, and I told it for years, and sometimes to really, really, really intense detail, and sometimes just very, vague one or two sentences. And it got to the point where I was, going through high school and then into college, and then just different people I would meet, girls I would date, girls and guys that I would meet in the band scene. Like, if I told them this, it seemed like more often than not, people would come back and say, "Oh yeah, I had something like that happen to me," or "Yeah, I was raped, you know, when I was 17," or this or that, and then so many people. I mean, if it turned out it was all of them who told me their story, I would believe you. But so many people just came and said, "You're the first person I ever told this to, though. Like, I didn't have anyone to turn to when I was younger, or I didn't want to break up my family, or um, I didn't think my mom would believe me, or my mom didn't believe me, or my dad didn't believe me, or like any reason. I just heard so often I didn't have anywhere to turn. So, I was playing in all these bands, and I started really kind of thinking about, like, you know, we were playing around some bands, and some of the bands we looked up to were taking on a cause of self harm. Or you might have even heard of it, that to write love on our arms. Um,
Yes.
yeah, so many bands that I was playing in the same scene as, same genre as, were supporting To Write Love on Our Arms. I just thought it was so cool. I was like, you guys are playing hardcore music or punk music or metal or whatever, but you're still supporting this really great cause. I want a cause like that, and I want it to be a place where people can turn. You know, like for all those people who said that they didn't have a place to turn, I want to give a place. You know, um, and that's the world I know. The band world is, you know, the music world is one that I know, and I want it to be um, quote unquote cool. You know, like to be okay with this cause. Like there are so many agencies and organizations and you know, a million counselors, therapists, so many people doing such amazing work in this field, and all of it is valuable. But I
Mm-hmm.
felt like there was a huge underserved population in that agencies and counselors and this and that, they get so wrapped up in their day to day or their, you know, their advocacy or their crisis intervention, like all this stuff, that like what time is left for outreach, you know, and just going to where people are and saying, hey, if you've experienced this, there's a place for you. Um, so not only do we created a website where people can anonymously share their story, which is a voicefortheinnocent.org or avfti.org. So we created that, and there's a community of people there to listen and to, you know, talk back and offer support and offer resources. But then the other part of that is we go to everyday events. We're not just going to, you know, resource fairs for violence prevention, or we're not just going to coalition meetings and stuff. We're going to pride festivals. We're going to music festivals, concerts. We're going to comic conventions. Like we go anywhere and everywhere there's people. If someone says, will you come set up a table and we can afford to get there and there's people there, we'll go, you know. And we know that
Mm-hmm.
when we go, we stick out like a sore thumb, but we don't, we set up and we have t-shirts for sale, and the t-shirts are have really good designs because we hire designers for them, you know. um, so it's something that people hopefully would want to wear, especially that we're, you know, in the music industry where we're in, you know, a lot of shirts with great designs. And then we hand out information that and we have conversations at our table. And we have a project that my wife started called Hope Notes, where it's basically a word of encouragement from one to another, and we have a suitcase full of them. And people can just take them, and then we have a table where they can write them at our booth as well. So, and then one of the things we're doing as we're traveling more and more outside of Ohio is well, that's where I'm from, is Cincinnati, Ohio. But as we're
Mm-hmm.
traveling more outside of Ohio, we're actually taking state specific literature with us. So if we're in Illinois, I can give you a list of all the things that are in Illinois, and you can find your city and see what's around you. And um, you know, a lot of times people aren't doing research beforehand because you hope you never need it, you know, um, or you hope that your friend never needs it or whatever. But we try to make sure to get that information in the hands of people, of places they can call, and um, therapists that are available, and counselors and agencies and all that. So, and that's what's growing, is us doing all these different events all over.
Yeah, that's really great. And how many people have shared their stories through your website? Do you know?
Not offhand, um, but uh, I think the last time I looked, the comments that responded, um, like the comments back, I think we were close to 10,000.
Wow.
Which obviously there's more than one comment per story, but it's still, I didn't expect that many, you know? Um,
Yeah, so people are really responding to it, and I'm sure appreciate that they have this platform available to them to share their story in this way.
yeah, we usually get a couple a week, you know? Um,
Now, can anyone who is a survivor of sexual abuse and rape and such submit their story? Are there like certain criteria that you have to meet or something?
not really, no. I mean, not any criteria necessarily. We actually purposely say those affected by sexual violence. Um, because like we know that parents are indirectly affected, or a best friend, and part of what we want to do, the educational piece, is teaching people how to support those in their lives who do, you know, have stories. So we've had,
Okay, so it's not doesn't have to be just a survivor.
no, a mother can come on, or a parent or a sibling, and can say, this person in my life was affected, and just don't know how to be there for them. What can I do? We'll talk them through
that's
that.
great.
So we purposely in our mission statement said, instead of saying victim or survivor, we said those affected by sexual violence, because while the person being directly affected is probably the one most affected, to say they're the only one affected, is incorrect. And we want to provide support for all that are going through it,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. So, Jamie, how would you say that you're doing overall today?
I'm just busy. I'm just so busy, but I'm good. I'm really happy. I think. I know I'm really happy. I got married almost a year ago in June, and I love my wife very much, and she helps out with A Voice for the Innocent too. She's one of the people that started it and works on the board, and runs the whole volunteer program, and then Jaden, my stepson, he's the smartest kid I've ever met, and he knows it, and he's a delight, but he teaches me something every single day. And yeah, I'm happy. I love the people that I work with. I love what I do. Only thing if I were a little better with time management and gave myself a day off every now and again, I'd probably be a little happier. But yeah, overall, I'm really happy.
That's great. That's really great. So I want to ask you the final question that I have for you today.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, given what you know now, if you could go back to when you were going through your tough times and give yourself one piece of advice, what would it be?
I would, and I'd let myself know that parents can abuse, and that I wouldn't have been in trouble. I think I probably would have told sooner had I known those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's such an important point that absolutely parents can be the abusers. It might not always seem obvious or be something that we want to be true. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, anybody can be the abuser, even those who are supposed to, love us and support us and take care of us.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, before I let you go today, Jamie, how can people connect with you and find out more about your organization?
We are at avfti.org or avoicefortheinnocent.org. One can learn more about us there. We are on Facebook. Just search A Voice for the Innocent. We're on Twitter and Instagram, just at avfti. Or you can email us at info@avoicefortheinnocent.org. And depending on when this episode goes up, we're doing the partnership with Vans Warped Tour, and are doing a huge crowdfunding campaign. So if people are interested, we would love them to consider assisting with that as well. But if not, we would just love to hear from people, or would love to talk to them, love to hear stories.
Yeah. And when's that going to be?
The crowdfunding campaign is starting this week, and it'll probably be going for about a month. So,
okay.
We've been working out all the details with that, and it's been a long road, but we're almost ready to launch. So I'm not sure what the turnaround is from recording to posting, but for you, but if it's in the next couple weeks, it would be going on at that time.
Gotcha. Yeah. I will, I'll have a link to it in the show notes page either way, so that people can check it out in case it is still going on at that time.
Cool.
Awesome. All right. Well, Jamie, thank you so much for coming on here and sharing your story with us today. And, I really do admire the work that you're doing and the organization that you've created, and just for giving a voice to the innocent, as you say. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Great. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
You too.
Thanks for listening to the show today. This has been the Grass Gets Greener podcast, episode 74. Go to thegrassgetsgreener.com/Jamie S. So that's JAMIES to find the links mentioned during this episode or to leave a comment. Now, I just want to let you know that the crowdfunding campaign that Jamie was talking about here toward the end of the episode is still live, I believe. At least I checked it right before I recorded this, and I did this the Friday before it's gone live, and it was still live then, which actually puts it a little over a month from when it started, because we recorded this about a month back. But I know that he would love to have you go and check that out if you have an opportunity. So that's at saveourscene.org. I'll have a link to it on the show notes page here as well. But yeah, definitely, feel free to still go and check that out, as it might still be live at the time that you're listening to this. One of the things that stuck out to me from this episode is when Jamie was talking about how he was afraid to tell, because he thought that he was going to get in trouble for what was happening to him. And I think that that's a very common fear that a lot of people who are in those situations have. And I can identify with that to some extent, because it took me 5 years to tell someone that I had been bullied. And I think part of that was fear of being blamed for it, that it was, somehow my fault that happened to me. And yeah, so of course, when you have that fear, you don't want to tell someone about it. But it is so important to talk about it, because number one, it's not your fault. And number two, you shouldn't have to carry that burden. There is something so freeing in being able to share your story with others that you just can't experience if you're keeping it to yourself. And if you're someone who's in that situation right now, I encourage you to try to find a way to tell someone about it. And it certainly is important to tell someone who is going to be supportive and is not going to judge you and not going to blame you. And I understand that you might not always feel like you have someone around who would be that person. And if that's the case, and if you're someone who's been affected by sexual violence, then I recommend you go check out A Voice for the Innocent, and perhaps you'll be able to share your story there and, be able to do so anonymously so that you don't have to have those fears. But either way, definitely check out A Voice for the Innocent. It's a great organization, and, give them a like on Facebook or something. I know that they would appreciate the support. And we're also going to have a few more people from the organization here on the show during some future episodes. So be on the lookout for that. And actually, the next few episodes that are going to be coming out are going to be with some really inspiring young individuals, people in their early 20s who are already doing some great things in spite of what they've gone through. And next week's is going to be with motivational speaker Nick Barwick, and he's going to talk about overcoming multiple forms of abuse and ending up in the foster care system. I felt really inspired when I got done recording that episode with Nick, and I think that you're going to feel the same way. So be sure to come back next week to check that one out. And in the meantime, you can head over to iTunes or Stitcher to leave the show a rating and review so that we can reach as many survivors as possible. And, as always, have hope.